Okay, so in our last unit, when we left off, we were talking about this new government that was created under the new Constitution. Backpedal a little further, we talked about the first plan of government, the Articles of Confederation, and how it had a lot of weaknesses. It lacked a court system, it lacked a president, it lacked the power to tax, which meant that our economy was going to be in trouble, or it was going to be pretty weak. So they had a convention in Philadelphia in 1787, and after about 7 months, they came up with this plan of this new Constitution, which was unveiled. And we talked a little bit about the Constitution, and we're going to be hitting on the major parts of the Constitution throughout the rest of the year. So if you feel a little bit lost on the Constitution, keep tuned in with our class, and you'll learn more about it. So this new republic now begins. And remember, a republic is a form of government where representatives chosen or elected by the people are going to serve the will of the people. So our president, our members of Congress, basically 2 of the 3 branches of government are all elected officials that we, the voters, choose to serve in our government. And we also have the power to elect somebody different if we feel that they are not doing as good of a job. George Washington was unanimously elected as our first president, and it made sense. He was the president in charge of the Constitutional Convention, trying to keep things in order. He was a 2-time war hero, so he not only helped the British and the colonists in the French and Indian War against France and the Native Americans, but then also in the American Revolutionary War for Independence in the 1770s, he was a major player in that. So it seemed wise to have him, since he was a good leader of men during a time of war, a time of crisis. He would likely be the best leader in terms of this new country, this baby, if you will. So he was inaugurated or took office in April of 1789, and he was kind of reluctant to do it, but he also felt that the country would be in danger if the right person wasn't put in charge. So he thought, if so many people think I can do a good job, maybe there's something to that. Now, he knew that being the first of his kind and the first of anybody to do anything is going to set a precedent or an example for others to follow. So one of the first and most important precedents that he sent, and again, precedent is an example of other people to do, he put together a cabinet or a group of advisors. So he said, I'm not the smartest person in terms of the economy. I'm not the smartest person in terms of dealing with foreign nations. I'm not the smartest person in terms of education, but I'm going to pick people who are. I'm going to pick people who are experts in their field, and they're going to advise me or give me, I'm going to bounce my ideas off of them, and they can let me know, yes, this is a good idea, this will work, or no, that's a terrible idea, let's come up with a different plan. 2 of his most famous cabinet advisors were Thomas Jefferson, our Secretary of State, who was in charge of dealing with foreign countries, and Alexander Hamilton, who was our Secretary of Treasury, our first Secretary of Treasury, and that's why he's on the $10 bill, because he was really the first person in charge of fixing the economy and getting it up and running. Jefferson became president, our 3rd president. Hamilton, however, did not, mainly because he was shot and killed before it was likely that he could have earned the presidency. One of the other things that George Washington did was he created something called the Judiciary Act of 1789. And this, with our new court system that was created by the Constitutional Convention that was put in our new Constitution in 1787, Washington laid out this plan for procedures. So how would our Supreme Court, how would our highest level judicial branch body, how would they operate? And he named John Jay the first Chief Justice. So the Chief Justice is basically the captain of the Supreme Court. John Jay, if you recall, was a Federalist and one of the 3 authors of the Federalist Papers, along with Hamilton and John Adams. Okay, John Jay was the 3rd of that triumvirate, and he was very knowledgeable in terms of law and justice, and that's where Washington trusted him to be the head of the Supreme Court. Now, speaking of Hamilton and the economy, our economy was struggling shortly after the war, and even, for a good amount of time afterwards, we were battling national debt. Debt, again, is money that you owe to somebody. So how did we go into debt? Well, it was from the Revolutionary War. We borrowed money and resources from countries like France and Spain. We also borrowed some things from England before and even after the war. So debts need to be paid back. And since taxation was a very sensitive issue, the government had the right to tax now, but they didn't want to overtax the people and upset them again. So Hamilton was tasked with the idea of, let's fix the economy, let's figure out ways to make money. And so he thought, why don't we issue bonds, or in other words, certificates that loan money to people, and people can borrow money from the federal government and then pay it back in interest. So interest, whenever you borrow money from some bank or from some person or some company, they're going to expect that not only do you pay back everything that you borrowed, but you're going to pay back interest money, which is essentially a tax paid on the time it takes for you to pay the money back. So most people, when they go to buy a house, they don't have the money to pay for it in cash up front. They have to borrow it from a bank. So the bank says, yes, we'll loan you the $200,000 to buy this house or to mortgage this house, and you're going to pay us back a monthly payment every month for sometimes 10 years, sometimes 20 years, sometimes 30 years. And for every month that you still owe us money, we're going to charge you a percentage in interest. Sometimes it's $3, 3%. Sometimes it's 5%. Sometimes it's more than that. But this way, both parties get what they want. If you're borrowing money, you get the money to pay for what you want or need, and then the bank is going to get all that money back plus money in interest. And once the economy started to flourish, the government could easily then pay back these debts. And there's this old saying that goes, you got to spend money to make money. So some people are wondering, well, if the country's in debt, why would they give away some of their money? And again, it goes back to this, you got to spend money to make money. So if they spend the money and give it out to people to purchase things that are going to be good for the country, knowing that these people have to pay back their debts plus a little more in interest, that's going to give them government even more money in return. So in the long run, it's a good scheme, good strategy. So he devised this idea of a national bank. And Hamilton said, if we set up a national bank that belongs to the federal government, this will help us pay off our Revolutionary War debts by issuing loans and bonds. Also, from collecting taxes from the people, that tax money then would go into this federal bank or this Federal Reserve, and that would be used to pay off the bills that the government has. Now, in doing this, though, there were some people who ran into trouble paying back their loans or paying back their debt to the banks, and their possessions would get taken from them, or in some cases they might have to face jail time, and that upset some people. And we'll talk about some of the rebellion that occurred from that. But in essence, the more money that the government loaned, the more money that they get back in interest. Now, in 1789, over in France, they were having a revolution of their own. And very similar to the American colonists, their revolution or their fight back against their government was led by a bunch of middle and lower class citizens who were upset at unfair taxation, at being disrespected and not heard properly by their king and queen. And so since they felt dissed by their leadership, they revolted. Now, at first, Americans felt France's pain, and they looked at many of these French peasants and said, yeah, if your government's mistreating you, if they're disrespecting you, you should fight back. You should stand your ground and get what's right. Not, take it out of hand, but at least stand up for what you deserve. And so many of them at first supported these French peasants. Unfortunately, the French Revolution became extremely violent, and there was about a 4 to 8 year time period that was known as the Reign of Terror. And this was an era that was marked by violence, threats, terrorism. And once this became overly violent to the point where people were going out and murdering anybody who represented the French government or who stood and supported the French government, and they also murdered the king and queen. They beheaded both King Louis and Queen Antoinette. And once it got this violent, many Federalists like Alexander Hamilton and John Adams and others who sided with their politics started to resent France and looked at them as an overly violent country and a group of people that took it too far. On the other hand, Democratic Republicans, who really were this new political party that stemmed from the old anti-Federalists, people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison saw that there was really no wrong in what France did. And we've heard the quotes from Jefferson, who said that sometimes revolt and rebellion is necessary, and if it means that some blood is shed, then so be it. So Jefferson, while he did not condone violence and murder, If it was violence that came from standing your ground and defending yourself and defending what you rightfully were owed, then Jefferson saw very little problem with that. So again, at the beginning of the Revolution, it was very similar to the American Revolution in that you had a group of people being disrespected by their government. But as time went on, it became overly violent, and that's where it started to split from similarities with the American Revolution. The American Revolution was really violent in the fact that it led to war, and during war, you got people fighting for land and resources and standing their ground. But war is typically not where people are looking to full-fledged murder others. They're just following orders, and they're looking to use force to try and gain what they feel is rightfully theirs. So that's a little bit on the French Revolution and also the beginning of this new republic in America.